Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriele Magni. I'm a professor in the Political Science Department, and I'm also the director of the Global Policy Institute. Many of you are taking a class with me, which is a class on LGBTQ politics. And then we have people from outside. We have another class, the Queer Theories class, that is joining us today. And this is the first conversation of the semester with LGBTQ leaders. Next week, we're going to have Evan Lowe, who is a member of the California State Assembly and is the chair of the LGBTQ Legislative Caucus. But today, I'm very excited to welcome a giant in the history of AIDS activism and gay rights activism, Peter Staley. Peter Staley has been an influential member of ACT UP New York. He was the founding director of TAG, the Treatment Action Group. He is a leading subject in the Oscar-nominated documentary that we watched for class, How to Survive a Plague. And more recently, he co-founded the PrEP for All collaboration and the COVID-19 Working Group New York. Peter is joining us also because he's the author of this book, Never Silent, ACT UP and My Life in Activism. And it's really a wonderful memoir. It's a journey through life and activism. And Peter is going to talk about some of the spectacular actions that he organized as a member of ACT UP to end the AIDS crisis. So we are very fortunate to have Peter with us today, and we can get started. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me, Gabriel. Welcome everyone from Loyola. I can never pronounce it. Loyola.
Thank you. Where are you?
I lived in Long Beach for in my youth, not too far from you guys. So.
Okay. So yeah, not too far. And where are you joining us from today?
I'm in rural Pennsylvania, about an hour and 45 minutes out of New York City, right over the Delaware. I got a house out here where I spend about 90% of my time now with my dogs. And I still have a little teeny apartment in Manhattan.
Okay.
That I'll never give up my New York roots, and that's where I'll probably end up retiring.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what we're planning to do today, I'm going to ask questions for 25-30 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A from students, everyone in the audience for the second part of the event. So you can use the chat to put your name or to write your questions so that we have an idea of who wants to ask questions later. Okay, so Peter, I wanted to start in 1985. 1985 is the time when the first HIV test becomes available, and 1985 is the time when you find out that you are living with HIV. And so I wanted to ask you, well, first, how did you find out? And then more broadly, what did it mean to find out that someone had HIV in the mid-1980s?
Yeah, I found out in the fall of 85, probably before most of you were born. It was, just so you know, it was 4 years into the AIDS crisis. The first reported cases were in 1981, shortly after Reagan had become president. And I was a college student in 81, like you all are, at Oberlin College at the time. And I wanted to follow my older brother to Wall Street, and I managed to get a job at Morgan Guarantee, which is now JP Morgan, upon graduation in 1983. So that's when I moved to New York. And 2 years later, I was a bond trader, US government bond trader at Morgan Guarantee. And the US government bond market was very much in the news in the early 80s. It was the major market because of inflation, and the Federal Reserve had raised interest rates to 21% and to try to snuff out inflation. And the bond market was a wild ride as we were trading ostensibly what was what we called Reagan's debt, because Reagan ran up huge deficits for tax cuts for the rich. So I was in this crazy job, very, very closeted. I was 24. And I sat down to watch with this new fling I had. I sat down to watch the first TV movie about AIDS called An Early Frost. I think it was on NBC. I can't remember which network, but it made huge news because HIV was so stigmatized, and gays were the most hated minority in the country at that point. All the advertisers pulled out. Not a single advertiser refused to run an ad on this TV, just TV movie. And that actually made the country very interested. So it ended up getting blockbuster ratings. I mean, the whole country sat down to watch this thing. And it was a fictional account of a closeted gay man finding out he had AIDS and having to tell his conservative parents. And it was a tearjerker. And while I was watching it, the character played by a gorgeous actor named Aidan Quinn, he was pretending to have PCP pneumonia, the #1 killer of people with AIDS. And he was coughing like he had pneumonia. And I had a bad cold at the time. I had something that was making me cough very loudly. And my boyfriend kind of nudged me in the side and he said, "You sound like him," pointing to the television. And I said, okay, I'll go to my doctor. And I was very lucky to have a gay doctor in New York, one of the few. And but I was so ignorant about, I was so closeted that I had no idea about what was going on with how bad AIDS was in New York City. The mayor wasn't talking about it. We had Ed Koch, who was a closeted gay man himself, who refused to talk about AIDS. Reagan hadn't mentioned the word. There were no major health warnings, even though it was spreading rapidly. Unbeknownst to me, my doctor, his office was kind of like on the front lines of that crisis. And I didn't know that most of his patients were sick and dying. But he got into the practice of, anytime any of his gay patients came in for pretty much anything, he would run a CBC, a complete blood count, the most common blood test given to all of us. And he had he learned this little trick that a lot of the AIDS docs learn. If you got a low white blood cell count, it would be an early sign that that patient might be HIV positive. So he ran a CBC, and it turns out all I had was a cold. I didn't have PCP pneumonia, but I had low white blood cells. And he asked me to come back in for more tests. And that's when I found out. And it was a total shock. I was 24. My family didn't know I was gay. And yeah, so I went home that Thanksgiving, 10 days later, told my family, each member one at a time, hardest conversations I've ever had. And I was very, very blessed that they rallied around me and became my initial support group. And I jumped on this crazy learning curve of trying to learn everything I could, buy myself some time, and got really, really lucky that a year and a half later, a movement started that I could be a part of and join and be saved by. It was called ACT UP.
Yeah, and so to follow up on ACT UP, can you tell us, especially to people who are not even born in 1987, how would you describe ACT UP, and maybe why did you decide to join ACT UP? How does a bond trader who was very closeted until a couple of years before decide to join one of the most radical organizations fighting AIDS?
Yeah, well, ACT UP itself, I'll give a brief history. First off, it was formed and launched in March of '87, 6 years into the crisis. So we didn't take to the streets quickly. And most people feel that the reason for that was that we were such a despised minority in the country that our posture politically on the national stage was like walking on eggshells. It was always scared of an even worse backlash. So our national gay rights groups, Human Rights Campaign Fund, NGLTF, GLAAD, etc., they played a real insider game. They tried not to rock the boat too much. And our first AIDS groups concentrated on taking care of the sick and dying. And they really were at a loss to how to get started nationally, given the political environment. Larry Kramer, who helped launch the first AIDS group back in 1981, Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York, grew very frustrated that that group didn't become political and just concentrated on perfecting this gorgeous care model to take care of the sick and dying. He wanted something to take to the streets. And it just took a rising death count over 6 years before the community felt desperate enough and angry enough to say, fuck it, we've got to go, we've got to risk a backlash. We've got to burst out onto the national scene, put our bodies on the line, because we're all going to die. I mean, it was like, do something or die. It was going to be the end of gay men in the US. That's how much death and dying was happening. Just so you know, by 1983, studies showed that we got the test in '85, but they started they took that test and they started looking at stored blood samples from gay men. Actually, that from a hepatitis study in the late '70s that was done for many years, and they saw that back in 1977, about 5% of gay men in New York and San Francisco were already infected. By 1983, it was 50 or 60% of us were positive. And that's, I think I got infected my first summer in New York. I write about it in a chapter in my book. A lovely affair I will never regret with a cute bartender in the West Village that worked at a piano bar. And you know, God rest his soul. He passed away in '91 from AIDS, but neither of us knew there was a virus in that room with us. So.
Right. And so ACTAP comes on the scene, and who can you tell us, how did ACTAP work? How were the decisions made, the strategies? Who were members of ACTAP? Could anyone join? Yes.
So Larry Kramer does this speech at the Gay and Lesbian Community Center in New York. And he, says, we've got to form a group to take to the streets. He gets the room totally riled up. Within 2 days, they say, okay, let's come back to the center and start this group. And they meet two or three nights later for the first meeting. And I think at the second or third meeting in March, they pick their name. Somebody, they start brainstorming names. Anybody can walk into the room. And we were having these meetings on Monday nights at 7 p.m., 7:30 at the Gay and Lesbian Community Center. And right away, they were large. It was like over 100 people at the very first meeting. They set their first, they said, okay, let's do our first demonstration. Let's do it. AZT has just been approved. The price is outrageous. Let's do it on Wall Street. and will get national press attention because they've never seen people with HIV get arrested. And that was our hook. I mean, we were a national news story from day one because Americans had never seen hundreds of angry queers consistently putting their bodies on the line to get arrested week after week after week. They thought, we basically shattered the American myth of the homosexual as being weak and timid and cowering in a corner when threatened. We were anything but that. And we gave them visuals to match. And so anybody could come to our meeting. We did, unlike some movements like Occupy, which made, I think, a critical mistake of trying to do, have a universal votes where everybody has to agree. We had majority votes, so you only had to win 50% plus one of the hands in the room on should we demonstrate here? Yes. Should we spend $500 to buy more t-shirts? Yes. Everything over $1,000 expenditure had to be approved by whoever, that huge group that showed up on Monday nights. Very, very democratic to a fault. I came there after the very first demonstration. I got handed a flyer on my way to my job on Wall Street before the demo started. I didn't see the demo, but when I got home that night, I saw it on the news, and I was like, this is what I need. This is the only chance I've got. And so I joined for really selfish reasons. Because I just was like, I'm going to die here. I need to figure out if I can buy myself some time. And it's very obvious the US government is doing nothing. And the only, I'm a logical person that I may not be naturally a radical, but I knew logically the only way to move the ball was something extreme, because the politics were just terrible against us. The backlash against people with HIV, gay people had only gotten worse during the first 6 years of the crisis. And so we just had to throw Hail Marys and just pray that we made a difference. And so I joined for selfish reasons, but within 6 months of joining this glorious movement, and it really was incredible. You walked into that room and there were veterans of Stonewall. There were guys and girls my age and everything in between, and from all walks of life. And we all knew that this was the most excitement that had been felt by the New York queer community since Stonewall. The veterans were telling us that. They said, we haven't seen anything like this since Stonewall. So we knew from day one that we were going to make some kind of history. We didn't know if it would be, a flame out or a series of successes, but we knew we were going to make history. And that was so exciting. And to feel as though you're fighting for something larger than yourself, for everyone who's HIV positive around the country and around the world, that bug bit me hard by the summer of '87. And I haven't felt selfish about my activism ever since. It's a beautiful, beautiful feeling. And I've stuck with it since then. So.
Yeah, and talking about some of the, since you talk about the bug of activism and some of the extreme actions or most daring action, I want to just share some pictures of some of the action that you help organize and lead, and then ask you if there is an action you're especially proud of or you have especially fond memories of. And so just pick four, because we could talk for the entire hour about some of the action. But here, I think this is a picture from when you shut down trading on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. So you went from bond trader to shutting down the New York Stock Exchange. This one is a picture, I believe, of the action to seize the FDA, and we can see you there on top, by the way, next to a picture of Dr. Fauci, I believe. So, and I lived for 6 years in North Carolina, and this picture, I believe, is from North Carolina, the house of Jesse Helms, who was then senator from North Carolina, very, very infamous homophobe in the US Senate, strongly against gay rights, who opposed any funding, federal funding for HIV research. And so here you put a giant condom on his house. And
it's actually his DC-based house. It was in Arlington, Virginia. We waited for the August recess of Congress, and he was in North Carolina when we put this condom over his Arlington, Virginia home.
I see. And then the last picture is, I believe, here. Probably you were arrested after occupying the headquarters of the pharmaceutical industry that was making AZT, which was the first approved treatment for HIV, to protest the outrageous price at the time.
Right, Burroughs Wacom. That was in North Carolina.
Okay. Is there any action that you are especially proud of today, or you remember fondly?
Well, the stock exchange action, the first picture you put up, was certainly the most cathartic, because I had gone through working on Wall Street for 5 years on a U.S. government bond trading floor, which back then had to be, in New York City at least, the most homophobic, racist, misogynistic workplace in New York. All those bond trading floors, it was like working in a high school male locker room. Just testosterone to the extreme, and people breaking their phones on the desk, just getting brutally angry if things weren't going their way, and I just hated it. And I heard the F word 15 times a day, and just had to sit there and stew about it. I heard horrible things about AIDS, and I just had to sit there and stew about it, even after my diagnosis. And so when I finally left and went on disability, first off, I told my boss that I was going on. I told him everything, and I said, "You can tell the whole market why that I'm gay and I have AIDS-related complex, and this is my last day. You can tell them tomorrow." And the whole market found out the next day, and they were shocked. It's a very small club, U.S. government bond traders, and only a few of them checked in on me afterwards. But a year and a half after that, I was full-time ACT UP and protesting the price of AZT. And we figured out how to get past security on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange to do a demonstration right on the floor on a VIP balcony overlooking it. And we snuck in at right before the opening bell. We got up onto the balcony, we unfurled this banner, and we all had marine foghorns in our pockets, and we set them off, and you couldn't hear a thing except these blares. All the traders look up at us and realize we've invaded their sanctum. They became rabid, as I knew they would. They wanted to rip us to shreds, and they were all throwing things at us from below and yelling the F word again, and die faggot. And I was just smiling, because I knew that the next morning we'd be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. We'd be on the cover of the New York Times, because nobody had done this before. And they were my pawns. They were part of what I wanted that moment to be. I wanted them to be as homophobic as possible, to look like total assholes. they were doing it because the press would be sympathetic to us, and they were, and the company caved 3 days later, and they lowered the price. It was a hugely successful action. So that moment of looking down on that hatred and feeling power over it after internalizing it for 5 years and not doing anything about it was just complete catharsis. So yeah, that felt the best.
Well, listening to you talking about this, I mean, I think we can feel still the pride and the excitement and the joy as you're like remembering this. And I think this is something that really is striking in the book, like the whirlwind of emotions in ACT UP, because it's true that on the one hand, there was anger at the political establishment, medical community, society, who really didn't care. There was the bravery, the courage, the fearlessness of the activists who were undertaking these daring actions. And then on the other hand, and this is, I think, something that comes out very well from your book, and I have a few lines that I want to show because I think they're very powerful. There was the joy, the excitement, and the sense of community. These are some lines from your book in which you are talking about how, yeah, there was pain, there were struggles going on, but at the same time, there was also the need to live. And this joy and excitement, they were not incompatible with the pain and the anger. They were complementary. They were necessary to survive. And you say they were necessary for activism to thrive. I think this is a very powerful message. So I was wondering if you could tell us, I don't know, elaborate a little bit on this sense of community in ACT UP, this excitement. Why was it important for activism to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, if I recommend, if any of you haven't seen it, there's a French film called BPM, Beats Per Minute. And it's a dramatization. It's only like 5 years old or 7 years old. It's a dramatization of ACT UP Paris in the mid 90s and or early 90s, from a really famous art house director in France who's done beautiful films. And he had been a member of ACT UP Paris. So based on his own memories, he created this gorgeous, gorgeous film. And I don't think there needs to be another film about ACT UP ever made. It's so perfect. And it captured ACT UP New York as well. I'm sure it's streaming somewhere. But he captured that feeling that, you know, when you don't know if you're going to be alive 2 years from now, and you don't know whether, and you're doing crazy activism, you're getting arrested constantly, you're doing constant meetings every night, and the emotions are running high, and you're arguing with each other passionately about the issues, you're getting into fights, but then, you know, and then you're doing constant memorials. Your friends are getting sick. You're losing friends. There's just a level of death that you're experiencing in your 20s that would crush you if you didn't find some release. And since we were this community of activists, it became total. It became complete. We were one glorious, wild family, and with a lot of incest. So we were all, you know, every weekend we'd take over the nightlife in New York was at its peak, and ACT UP members would, you know, we would say which club we were going to hit that weekend, and we had our favorites, and we would like take over the dance floor. There'd be dozens of us, and ecstasy was a new drug, brand new, and it was good. It was pure. And then and Madonna was at her peak. So we had Madonna on the dance floor, you know, Like a Prayer, and So I just have these, my book is not a downer. It captures the beauty of this movement and how we really loved each other and kept each other from mentally falling apart. I've always said an activist who completely keeps his or her mind 100% in the cause, in the fight itself, how bleak that can be, especially when you don't know whether you're going to live to see the fruits of your activism. That person becomes a useless activist. It's just, you would just crumble up into a ball. You couldn't take it. And so we started living to the fullest as well. And that kept us going. That kept us mentally alive. And yeah, so that's, I try to write a lot about that in the book.
Yes, definitely. Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So start thinking about the question that you want to ask. And my last question is about the influence that ACT UP had in changing the perception of gay people, LGBTQ people. You briefly touched upon this before. On the one end, we know now that ACT UP played a fundamental role in pressuring the medical and political community in making advancement for research. But I think on the other hand, ACT UP also played a very important role in changing the way in which gay people were seen by society at large. I remember listening to an interview with Ann Northrop, another member of ACT UP, after the St. Patrick's Cathedral action. And she says initially she wasn't sure how people would react. And then she's talking, I think, to her mom, and there's a friend from Denver who says, well, I realized for the first time that gay people can be fierce, they're strong, they're daring. Is that also your impression on the impact that ACT UP had on perception of gay people in society?
Yeah, I don't think, most people now peg it, and I certainly do, to kind of the birth of the modern gay rights movement. Everything that happened afterwards, all the victories and the current passion that's being brought to trans rights and the battles in front of us. All of that happened because we found we went from a position of really not having any faith that we had much power in the country and that we would get crushed if we were too loud. And really, this walking on eggshells posture that set in the late 70s, with the exception of San Francisco, which had this really glorious activism centered around Harvey Milk and others. The rest of the country was just, we were in our gay ghettos. We were living half closeted lives or full closeted lives and partially out lives at the clubs, at the bars, with our friends. But we did not stick our heads up to go on national television or with the exception of, a few dozen brave people, activists during those years. And as a movement, we weren't doing that. And, death is fear of dying is an incredible motivator. And that pushed us out of the closet. It was like, if we stay in the closet, we're all going to die. The government's not going to lift a finger. So it really, it yanked us out. And then we started, right away, ACT UP started building up winning victories. The FDA folded like a deck of cards within a year on all our demands. And we were the number one movement in the country at the time. We were the movement du jour. The whole country knew the words ACT UP by 1989. And we started racking up victory after victory after victory. And by the time we had the incredible medical breakthroughs in '96, America no longer, people were talking about the powerful AIDS lobby, but queer people had learned that if we all stick together and we show our determination and our indignation at being treated like second-class citizens, we could definitely win victories. And so there was no looking back after that point. We have been an indignant community ever since. Every time people fuck with us, we push back now. And that was because of ACT UP. I don't see that waning. I see it, everybody on this screen here, I see it in your generation as well. It's like, how dare you? You guys take to social media immediately when people cross red lines that just are bullshit, that don't treat you with the dignity that you deserve. And that's how you win.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing these powerful memories and message, Peter.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions? Who wants to ask the question? Feel free to, you can raise your hand so I can see you on the screen and I can call you. Who wants to go first? Olivia.
Hi, thank you so much, by the way, for coming and speaking with us. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So I loved your book. I thought it was really insightful, and it's definitely a book. I've never read something similar to it. And what really caught my eye, which I found really interesting, was the juxtaposition between this deadly virus and also how liberated all the members of ACT UP really felt. And so I guess my question is, and one of the particular chapters I found really interesting was the part where you all were talking about how people were afraid to have sex after they realized that they were HIV positive, and then how that transformed into more of this kind of sexual liberation when people started promoting safe sex, and that became kind of a brand of the movement. So I was just wondering how you would say this sexual liberation really saved the movement or saved the people in ACT UP, or was just a motivating factor for all of those who were pushing back?
Yeah, I mean, our job number one, obviously we wanted to find medical treatments to save our lives, but there was no way to do that without the federal government drastically increasing the amount of money it was spending on AIDS research. And there was no way to do that with a Republican president and most of the country in a posture of hating, of being okay with gay people dying. So we had to make a dent in that homophobia, which is like really hard. And just putting our bodies on the line and being very in your face. Part of that backlash during HIV was these disgusting people not only deserve to die, but they definitely shouldn't be having, if they have any sex at all after they find out that they're positive, they should be thrown in prison for life. There were calls for quarantine. There were calls for branding us. There was an op-ed in the New York Times that called for tattooing people with HIV, gay men with HIV on the buttocks. Just crazy shit. And so, how do you deal with that type of nuttery on the right? We decided, go all, we knew that safe sex worked, and we were like, screw you. We're going to have, we are going to be sexually active, even if we have the virus, because it is safe. The science has shown that, and we are going to be a pro-science movement. And to this day, that's one of the things Tony Fauci points out, even though we were, putting his head on a stake at demonstrations and very hard against him, we were never crazy like the people who are attacking him today. We were very pro-science. We just wanted him to do the science faster and better. So we just got very in your face. I think we were the most sex positive movement in American history because of pushing back against that stigma. We plastered New York with posters that had, pornographic pictures on them promoting safe sex, and we would show up en masse at the straightest bars in New York and start what we called kiss-ins, where we'd all start deep kissing each other, gay men and lesbians, and and we have that safety in numbers. So we did all sorts of crazy shit to really push back. And it was kind of the Jon Stewart effect, and the TV effect that happened years later, where there was enough representation of gay people on TV that the country eventually got over their realized that we were just as human as they were, and we were going to be just as sexual as they were. So, great question. Thanks,
Ryan.
Hi there, and so nice to meet you. I wanted to ask you, because sort of looking now to the future and sort of what has come out in terms of HIV and AIDS treatments and PrEP, and there's an article recently about how Moderna is using the same technology that they used for the COVID vaccine to start trialing a HIV vaccine. And my question was, do you think that PrEP and sort of essentially the pill, Descovy, Truvada, do you think that those are enough right now, and that they are, even though they are effective, do you think that that's enough when it comes down to sort of helping to stop people from contracting HIV AIDS? Or do you think that things like a vaccine or an inevitable or eventual true cure for HIV AIDS is where medical research and additional sort of time, energy, and money should continue to go?
Great question, Ryan. PrEP as it stands right now, which is a pill you have to take every day, is not going to get us there, mostly because it has to be the most at-risk groups for getting HIV are younger people, mostly gay men of color and trans women of color. Young people in general, regardless of generation, my generation, all generations when they were young, have a problem with risk awareness, and so to fully acknowledge your risk to the extent that you get a doctor and you start going to that doctor every 3 months or 6 months, and you get blood work and you take a pill every day, that's a huge leap as a public health intervention. That's a really, we're trying to get people to show up once for a vaccine shot in this country, and look at all the resistance. So to convince everyone at risk for HIV to take a pill every day, that's hard, especially when the most at-risk group are people in their 20s. So I think we found with the pill for preventing pregnancy in women, that when the technology is improved, when we went from a daily pill that a woman would have to take to longer acting interventions, and you can now get a nifty little implant that protects you for a year, and one and done, and you don't have to think about it for a while. So that's being studied for PrEP. We already have one long-acting version of PrEP now, which is a monthly injection I still think that's too much to have to go to your doctor once a month. But they're looking at 6 months, and hopefully they're looking at the implants as well. And the vaccine research and the cure research is all happening. And yes, we're going to need them. An HIV vaccine has been the holy grail since the virus was identified in 1983, 84. And it remains the holy grail. I think we're going to get it in the next, hopefully within 5 years, but definitely by 2030, we'll have an HIV vaccine. And I know a lot of you are wondering, how do we get COVID vaccines so fast? And here we are, we're 40 years into the AIDS crisis and we don't have an HIV vaccine. Why is that? It's because HIV is the wiliest virus that mankind has ever encountered. And COVID attacks, and they attack totally different cells. COVID attacks cells in the nasal cavity, cells in the lungs, and it kills quickly. It kills it only kills a very small percentage of the people it infects. HIV is built to attack your immune system, and its job, it wants to turn your immune system into a factory for more HIV that gets spread sexually or through blood, and it's almost 100% fatal if untreated. So very different viruses, but a virus that starts attacking your immune system from day one and subverts it and gets around antibodies and stuff like that. That's the reason. We've had dozens of HIV vaccines, and HIV sneaks around them because that's what it does. So COVID doesn't attack your immune system. It doesn't care about your immune system. That's why we don't have a vaccine, but hopefully we will. And maybe this mRNA vaccine that Moderna is looking at will be a little better than the others. We'll see.
Okay, Isma.
Hi. First, thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful having you. I wanted to ask you, to what extent do you think the creation of TAG, the Treatment Action Group, affected or helped the movement in the achievement of the original purpose, that of ACT UP?
Great question, Isma. I think if we could have avoided the infighting that happened 5 years into our movement and stayed together as a single group, that would have been ideal. But the infighting happened, and it was crippling everyone's work, including the Treatment and Data Committee, which was concentrating on trying to push the research establishment to find therapies that would save our lives. And we made a decision that the only way to continue that vital work, which a lot of people thought was the most important work of the organization, was to split apart and stop the infighting. And that's what happened. ACT UP was able to continue and do its thing and get back to work on the other issues around HIV/AIDS that were essential to fight. And they did some really great work after the split. And TAG was able to concentrate on the research establishment, and we did incredible work. So the work continued. The split was essential to get back to work and to end the infighting. And we are arguing to this day as to who's to blame for the infighting. Why did things get so bad that it was caught? Everyone was spending half their time attacking other people. And I have my opinion in this book. Others have their opinions in their books. And I encourage you to read all the opinions, and it's great. It's fascinating history. It was a painful time, but I'm pretty convinced that the split had to happen.
Okay, and we have a question from Queer Theories class.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Peter, thank you so much. I'm Merit Sullivan. This is my Queer Theories class, where I feel like choked up hearing you, so I hope I'll get through my question. But my own work is actually on the histories of ACT UP Golden Gate and their overlapping work with breast cancer action and breast cancer activism. And so my question builds off of that, and the reading we've been doing in my class. We've been reading Kathy Cohen's work, where she references some of the racism and racial tensions of the gay men's health crisis, and perhaps some of the more narrow approaches that she diagnoses in Queer Nation. But I know that ACT UP New York and the Treatment Action Group were so much a part of wider coalitional work, especially getting the CDC to recognize the differential diagnosis for women with HIV, working on needle exchange projects. And Kathy Cohen, in her essay, actually references ACT UP New York and the Treatment Action Group as a model for coalitional politics. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it looks like to work sort of across lines of difference at this time.
Right. Well, I think I think AIDS activists as a movement today are doing, now we've perfected coalition activism, working with other movements, working with groups beyond healthcare, working with, with the greater progressive movement to, try to fix the world's problems. And AIDS activists as a whole are, if you look at all the people working in AIDS in the US and around the world, we now look like, we don't look like me, we don't look like an old gay white guy. We look like the communities most affected by HIV today. We are a very diverse community that very much represents those most affected. ACT UP, I don't think history should shy away from this. ACT UP, like many other movements like Occupy, etc., had real diversity issues. It was even Sarah Schulman in her book, who, God bless her, highlighted the fact that yes, we had powerful women in ACT UP, and we had incredible people of color in ACT UP. She still acknowledges that it was predominantly made up of gay white men. 80% of our members were gay white men. And in 1989, at our peak, over half of new infections in New York City were happening in African Americans, many of them African American women who were straight. And to have, an organization that you'd only have maybe one finger to count how many straight African American HIV positive women were in ACT UP. It's got a diversity problem, and TAG had the same problem. They're mostly a bunch of gay white guys, and I think that's you'll find the same issues with the peace movement in the late 60s and early 70s on college campuses. And we shouldn't shy away of examining those diversity issues. That said, it doesn't mean that the activists themselves were not very attuned to the social justice issues of that time. I think we were, and we tried to do coalition work. We tried to do the right thing. We fought the right battles. We won victories. But we weren't sorry for my dog. We weren't as diverse as we needed to be, and we should examine that. But great question.
Okay, so we are almost running out of time. So maybe let's collect the last two questions and then Peter can answer them. Nelly first and then Mark.
Yeah, so just thank you first of all for being here, reading through your book. I can only describe it as like a harmonical feeling. The emotions you put into it, the different ones, you can all feel it throughout the book. Now that I see you talking, I feel like you exhibit the exact same emotions that you did at the time of reading the book. And so just my question was, I was thinking about like the prices of these drugs. There's still for some, it's very expensive. In addition, like you mentioned, there's still no vaccine for AIDS. So I'm just wondering, what can we take from ACT UP's demonstrations as young people, and what can we build on? How do we build on ACT UP and its laws, and how do we further the legacy?
Great question, Nelly. This is a personal opinion, and it's shared by others, but not everyone. But I think one of ACT UP's great lessons was how we started, very loud and all over the map. But because we were in such a desperate situation that was very time limited, where we felt like we had to win victories right away or we'd all die, that forced us towards a really rational path of we have to learn, we have to push every button we could push. We have to work really hard. We have to become the experts. We have to be smarter than everyone else. And so it meant that being politically correct, being nice, all that stuff had to fall away. Being pure, having some pure ideology, caring about how we'd be viewed 30 years from now, all that shit it just didn't come up for us. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think the climate change movement has, for instance, could really use some really hard discussions about make some hard choices of what needs to be fought for now and quickly and fast, because we are out of time on climate change. And sometimes that means dropping these, pure positions of like being anti-nuclear, nuclear energy, for instance. And there are real debates happening here. But personally, I think what's ACT UP racked up its successes because we were extremely rational and not ideological in a sense. We proved that small numbers of people can, if you get together, you can definitely create change, especially if you become the experts and learn which buttons to push politically. So it takes work, though. Definitely takes work.
Okay, Peter, do you have time for one last question from Mark?
I do. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Peter. It is crazy that I get to talk to you right now. So I am a gay millennial. And so my question actually plays in closely to with what Nelly asked. My generation does lack that urgency, I think. But we still are dealing with some of the structures put in place for the majority of my life. There's been a lifetime ban on donating blood, and now it's 3 months because there's 3 months of celibacy because of this crisis we live in now, which is still ridiculous to me. But so and our generations too, because of the social networking nature of our activism, how do you suggest we move forward when the people working at the FDA can just turn off their computers and ignore our activism? Like, how do you suggest we move forward to try to dismantle some of these structures put in place, these homophobic structures put in place to stop us from advancing and dismantling these things?
Right. Well, first off, I don't think your generation is any more complacent than any generation before yours. It is a rite of passage to enter early adulthood with not a whole lot of historical knowledge, wanting to get on with your lives and start your lives. Act Up happened because we were literally, our lives were at risk. Your lives are not totally at risk right now en masse. Okay. So you're lacking that. I mean, the planet's at risk in a 10 to 30-year timeline or 100-year timeline. And, that's pretty far out, and it's already being harmed, and that's causing everybody anxiety, but you're not going to die in 6 months. We were like under a 6-month thing. So give yourself a break. I think your generation cares more than my generation did back then about the problems of the world in general. I think you're an incredibly empathetic generation. You are also facing more problems than most generations have faced, and they're huge. But all of these things need organizing, and they need rational people pushing hard that study activism, take lessons from the past, but have the confidence to say, we're going to create our own tools. We're going to create our own techniques and strategies. We're going to create our own playbook on how to do this. And, find the groups that are working on the blood ban. There are a few of them. Start doing coalition calls, become proactive, find the pressure points, decide whether you want to play an inside game or an outside game or both together, and work it. And you just work it. I still do activism to this day, and some of it fails. I've done 3-year campaigns on something where I've really worked at it off and on for 3 years, and it doesn't pan out. And it's very frustrating, but if as long as you keep the duration going, and I'm always willing to go back to the ones that didn't pan out. But as long as you stick to it and keep working it, you usually can make some progress. So it's just finding the others who are doing it and having real determination to stick with it.
All right, and I think this is a very powerful message to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Peter, for your decades of activism, for writing this very important book, and for sharing your powerful message with us today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. And for those of you in my class, I'm going to see you in class in 10 minutes or so.
Thank you for letting us join your class.
Yes, thank you.